And I know you love it.
You do?
Okay, we got new type of number, okay? Imaginary numbers, okay? So, it's actually, I know you guys probably think it's not funny. I think it's funny. But the mathematician, his name was Rene Descartes, okay? Who was famous for doing all this number stuff. He got to name all of them because he was the guy in charge. So he did all of his work in mathematics with real numbers. And he got to name them, real numbers. Then there was this other guy, I think it was Pascal, I can't remember, who did a bunch of work with imaginary numbers. But because Rene Descartes was like the actual like guy in charge, he got to name all the numbers. So he named this other guy's numbers imaginary numbers. So that's how they got their name, because this mathematician was being shady in like 1700, calling the stuff he did real and the stuff this other person did imaginary. So everyone's like, if they're imaginary, why do we do them? I said, because mathematicians are shady, right? Because someone named it imaginary. They do exist, okay? So an imaginary number is a non-graphable number.
Wait,
So it's a number, it exists, but you can't graph it. Okay, so this is a new type of number, okay? So the main imaginary number is I. We call it I. I is the square root of -1. So remember, for years you guys have been told you can't do the square root of a negative number? Your calculator can't, but after today, you will be able to. Okay? So, here's why I can still use the square root of a negative number. If I have the square root, so this is I squared here, square root of -1 squared, right? Because this is I squared. What happens when I squared and I square root the same thing? What happens? Yeah, they cancel. So here are the two big things for imaginary numbers you have to know. That I is the square root of -1, and I squared is -1. Okay, so that's our new type of number, okay? Now, we'll go back and talk complex in a second. How are we doing, okay? Okay, so a complex, we'll do that in a sec. What I want to do is I want to look at, let's start at 25, okay? Is the square root of 3 real or imaginary? So the square root of a negative number is what? It's a non-graphable, okay, maybe it'll help if I add to this definition. Non-graphable negative square root. Okay? It's a non-graphable negative square root. Okay? We're doing okay? Okay, so let's go to 25. So, is 25 a positive or a negative square root? So is it real or imaginary? It's a real number. What about 26? Good. 27? Good. And 28? Good.
That's a negative, it's imaginary.
You got it. Negative square roots are imaginary. Okay? Now, hold on. Now, if I'm looking at that imaginary and I just told you the I meant imaginary, well, then that's kind of a problem because there's no I's in 26 or 27, okay? So we're going to rewrite it in its imaginary way. You guys with me? So this square root of -6, I can think about it like the square root of -1 times the square root of 6. Okay? So then it's actually I square root 6. That's the imaginary way to write this number.
So do you have to write the stuff above it, or you can just write
Well, it depends on the question. The next questions I'm going to ask you are a little bit different, okay? So, for example, let's lead into why I just covered that here, okay? This example is on your homework, but I forgot to put one in the notes, okay? So if I wanted you to rewrite this number here as its imaginary number, okay, then what I would do is I would think about it like square root of -1 times the square root of 9. And the square root of -1 we now know is I. And the square root of 9 is what? Try again. Square root of 9? Yeah. 3. So the square root of -9 is 3i.
Oh.
Okay, let's do another one, okay? What if I needed to rewrite the square root of -16 as its imaginary counterpart?
Imaginary.
Nope, that's not my question. I want to rewrite it.
Would it be square root, -1 square root thing?
Okay, so then I'd split it into square root of -1, good, and square root of 16,
And then you'd find the square root of 16.
which is?
4.
4, and then you do this stuff.
You got it. So the square root of -16 is 4i.
Okay. That's
Good?
not bad.
Yeah. We doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so then try this one on your own. Rewrite the square root of -100 as an imaginary number.
Let me see.
Okay?
You gotta be. Where's the one?
I'm just writing some examples. This kind of stuff is in your homework, but I forgot to put it in your notes.
And then you said imaginary number.
Okay, work with your neighbors. I'll come around. Okay?